We've been in a series in the book of Philippians. So we've gone through 3 chapters, and today will be the final chapter of the book of Philippians. We called the series Renewing Our Minds. Remember, there were 3 major themes in Philippians. One is joy. One is the mind, particularly renewing your mind, and one is unity. So out of those things, we decided to focus in particularly on renewing of our minds. Let me just walk you through where we were, in case you haven't been here. Just give you a touch. There we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, chapter 1 was... Remember that renewing our minds means to think like Jesus. So chapter 1, Pastor John shared, renew our minds to a framework of surrender for our life decisions. Remember, I'm talking through what our life decisions are and whether or not we're surrendering to God with those life decisions. In particular, he talked about love and the priorities that we're choosing for our life. And then he focused in on verse 21, which was, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. The following week, Pastor Ryan shared chapter 2, renewing our minds to a framework of humility by emptying yourself, not one word yourself, but yourself, and acting like Jesus. Do you remember he went on to describe verse 5, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being the very form of God did not find equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. Remember those verses. Chapter 3, Pastor John last week, renew our minds to a framework of goals, from our accomplishments, our own accomplishments, to the goal of knowing Christ, that I may know him. I don't think I'll ever forget, if you were here last week, you might not either, him throwing his doctoral degree into the trash. All right, that picture will stay with me, that idea that the things that I count as accomplishments, I'm going to treat them as dung in order that I can know who Christ really is. Well, we're going on to chapter 4 today, which is the renewing of our minds for a framework of contentment. I want you to know that most of us here, sitting here, are not content. Even when you receive what it is you've been really striving for, what happens to us, unfortunately, is that we think of something else we'd rather have, or something more we'd rather have. We finally get the car, and then we want another car. We finally get the house, or we finally have gotten the job that we want, and somehow contentment doesn't stay with us. Most of us here are not content, and what Jesus would like for us to do is to find a framework that's contentment, where we're actually content with what we have. We're not in conflict about what we don't have, or we're not constantly reaching for something else that God hasn't even given to us. Well, there was this New York Times bestseller that was written a number of years ago by Ken Blanchard. It was called The 1 Minute Manager. I don't know if you've ever read it before or not, but The 1 Minute Manager was a business book, a real small one, which is the kind I can read, a real small business book, but it really suggested just this, that you can manage your business environment in a minute at a time. And it suggested that really it only takes 3 minutes when you're in conflict to be able to begin to resolve what it is that you're in conflict about. He suggested 3 things. He said, first, you take 1 minute where you talk to the person and you praise them for what it is that you're seeing them doing successfully. You start by just this 1 minute of praising. Then he says, then you follow it with 1 minute of reprimand. In other words, what you really would like to see that's not happening. And then you conclude with 1 minute of goals or 1 minute of vision of what it could look like or what you really believe they could accomplish. It's called the 1 Minute Manager. It was really 3 minutes. The idea was that you would help the person along to be able to understand, to be able to vision out what it is that you really were expecting, and it wouldn't feel quite so much like getting called to the principal's office and expelled from school. That was the idea of a 1 Minute Manager. Well, when we approach Philippians chapter 4, it feels very much like the 1 Minute Manager. Because when you read it together, you realize that Paul is putting together an encouragement sandwich. That's another way of saying the 1 Minute Manager. Have you ever heard this before? An encouragement sandwich is you start with a piece of bread that's just wholesome and it's just kind of nice and it's kind of what you can build something on. It's that praising, and then you lay on that the meat of what you really wanted to say. And then you put another layer of bread on top of it. It's an encouragement sandwich. Here's how Philippians chapter 4, verse 1 reads. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for. I'm sure that all of your spouses said this about you this morning. I love you and I long for you. It's really great when someone just tells you that they love you. If you're not saying that I love you enough to your spouse, to your kids, start there. This isn't just kind of like a 1-minute manager kind of suggestion. This is an understanding. When you know that you're loved, when your kids know they're loved, it changes their whole day. He starts with whom I love and long for, my joy and crown. Have you ever been called someone's joy? In other words, you make me so happy. You make me smile. You're my joy, and you're my crown. You're the thing I'm most proud about. Stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. Paul starts with the 1 minute of encouragement or the 1 minute of praising. But get ready, because here it comes. He goes from the 1 minute of praising to what some people would call throwing somebody under the bus. Have you ever been thrown under the bus? Yeah, so this is the definition of being thrown under the bus. It's an idiomatic phrase in English meaning to criticize, blame, or punish others, especially in order to gain advantage. People so thrown are typically in a vulnerable position. Whenever we have a family reunion, I'm the youngest of 5, Johnny gets thrown under the bus. That's me. It's stories that I don't remember, probably didn't happen, but might have happened. And usually it's in front of my 3 adult sons, which they, of course, want to know more details about being thrown under the bus. It's this moment where you're having a story told about you that you wish you had never had told. It's the dirt, and they're usually bringing it. And it's usually a bus that traveled in the 1960s and 1970s. So it's an old bus. Well, imagine if you were thrown under the bus for almost 2,000 years. That's what verse 2 actually is. Verse 2 reads like this. I plead with Euodia and Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yeah, for 2,000 years, we've been talking about these 2 women who had a fight in the church, like a big fight. They just would not get along, and he calls them out. He throws them under the bus. And for 2,000 years, we've been reading about this whenever we read Philippians chapter 4, Euodia and Syntyche. And I ask you, my true companion, Syzygus, help these women since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel. He's just saying this, man, they used to contend with me for the gospel. Now they're just contending with each other. They're just mad at each other. They haven't been together for a long time, and it's obvious to all of you. Wait, can you imagine? So the early church, it wasn't like they would get texts from each other or anything, or maybe even mail. They would get a letter from Paul, and they'd call you all together, and then he would read this chapter. And in chapter 1, he's talking about, how great God is and how you should surrender to him. And in chapter 2, he's talking about how we should be humble like Jesus. And in chapter 3, he's talking about how we should make Jesus our goal. And in chapter 4, he calls you out. Like what? He names you by name. I want to give a little bit more meat to this thought by inviting a few people to come forward. Abby, if you'll come and play the role of Euodia. Alana, if you'll come back up and play the role of Syntyche. All right, Bethany, I'm picking on all the staff that work closely with me. Where are you? Come on up. You're going to play the role of Syzygus. I'm going to call Syzygus Susie because it's a lot easier to remember. Go ahead and sit down. So Euodia and Syntyche we don't know what, come on over here first. Oh, that's perfect. That's great. We don't know exactly what happened between them. All we know is that it was a big fight. Like it might have been the first church split. Quite honestly, like it was serious. The 2 were angry at one another. They probably spent time frowning at each other, okay? That's a normal thing that happens when you're angry at someone. You frown at them, you scowl at them. They probably even crossed their arms. They were so upset with each other. Yeah, that's right. They probably had separated themselves. They wouldn't think of sitting next to each other in the pew. They would be at opposite ends of the pew. And they probably would even get to a point where they were shaking their foot. You know that feeling where it's like, it kind of lets your body know you're still thinking about what you're mad at her about. They probably even had clenched fists underneath these folded hands. They were so upset at each other, and they probably had gone from speaking to each other to speaking against each other. They probably had included, even at points, walking away from each other. But for sure, they had turned away from each other. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever had this kind of situation with anyone else in the church, maybe your husband and wife, or maybe your boss and your employee, or maybe something has made you kind of like uncontented where you are, and all that's happening is your uncontention, is that a word? Uncontention has driven you further and further apart from a solution. Paul says, Susie, I want you to enter into this situation. I want you to help these women since they can't get along. I want you to contend for them like they're contending against each other. I want you to fight for them. I just wonder this. You know, one of the things about a church is not only that we're supposed to get along, but we're also to help each other get along. A lot of times we move away from each other. We're willing to be separate from one another. We're willing to be alone from one another. We're willing to not deal with it. It'd be a lot easier for Susie just to kind of sit there and let them kind of, I don't want to get involved. That's not the instruction. Paul's saying, no, I want you to stand firm in the Lord. I want you to find the Jesus way and stand firmly in it. I want you to decide that we're going to do this how Jesus would like it done instead of how we're dealing with this. We want to change the conflict into contentment. Is that even possible? That's the main idea that I want to talk. And the really nice part about this scripture, and I chose it when we had a chance to kind of choose which ones we wanted to do, Philippians 4 kind of teaches itself. So all I've got to do is just kind of point you through it, if that's okay. The main idea is when facing every situation in life. Did you notice every situation in life? So it's the same situation the Quillens are facing. It's a conflict that they never wanted, but they're facing that. Whatever the situation. It sometimes is marriages, it sometimes is employment, it sometimes is the amount of money that's in your bank account, and sometimes it's the amount of food that's in your refrigerator. Like there's sometimes real conflicted areas in our life. How do we learn how to be content? Renewing our minds to be content. How do we do that? But how will we do that? Well, while Paul throws Euodia and Syntyche under the bus, he also recognizes that we have struggles too. So we did the 1 minute of blessing. We did the 1 minute of the correction that needed to happen. So now we'll just spend 1 minute talking about what it is that we're supposed to do, except that Paul gives 8 things to do. So we probably will spend just a little bit longer than 1 minute to talk about the action that we should take. Is that okay? Good. Let's read together. Verse 4 says this: rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. So the first thing that we should do is rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Chario is the Greek word, and it just really means to be full and overflowing with joy. To count your blessings, to name the goodness of God in your life. It's easy to see what's not going right and name that or point to that in your marriages or in your workplace or in your bank account. It's easy to point to those things, but instead the instruction from Paul is really simple. Rejoice in the Lord. Calmly be happy is what the Greek word really means. Understand that you are well off. That you've been provided for. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. He's trying to really make it clear. Rejoice. It's taking the negative and looking at it from a positive way. It's continuing to bless things until you're blessed. It's continuing to rejoice until you rejoice. It's continuing to lift up the Father until you are lifted up. Be joyful. It's to turn the frown, girls, ladies, to joy. You say, well, that seems like faking it. Well, it's not faking it if you have the joy, if you're rejoicing in the Lord, in His goodness. You may not feel the blessing, but if you take the time to think about it, you have the blessing. Eudia and Syntyche, rejoice. And Susie, help them to rejoice. You know it's the demons. It's the demons who destroy our joy. It really is. They would love to turn everything, have you see the uncompleted task and never the completed task. It's a demon who will always kind of whisper in your ear, well, you can't believe that. It's a demon that will say, you're not who you think you are, or they hate you, or other things. Like, ask yourself when those voices come to your head, whose voice is this? And if it's not the voice of the Father, the voice of the Spirit, quit listening to that voice. Remind them that the goodness of God is not bad, remind them of the goodness of God, not the badness of the circumstance. Be joyful. Here's the verse goes on. Verse 5a says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The ESV uses a different word. It uses the word reasonableness. I like that. Let your reasonableness be understood by all. Don't be unreasonable. The Greek word actually carries this idea of meekness or tameness. It really is this idea of a giant horse that has been trained to be a soldier's horse, and when they're in a parade, this giant horse is meek. It has all this power to be able to run fast, to pull things, to carry someone fast somewhere, but instead it shows this meekness around these kids running in and out of the parade. It's this meekness. It's power under control. That's what Jesus had, you see, because he held all power, dominion, and authority, and he hung on a cross, and he died. He was meek. He was willing to put himself to death for you. Well, be reasonable. Go from crossed arms to open arms. You can still have your fists clenched if you need to. Be reasonable. Here's the verse 5b. The Lord is near. Be reasonable because God is here. Like, this word near is really powerful because it has three separate meanings. The first meaning is location. Like, God is standing right here in the room. Quit being unreasonable, you two who are fighting. God is sitting right here. This is Susie, but God is sitting right there. Like, do you really want to act like this in front of God? Do you really want to act like this when God's presence is actually right here with you? So the first understanding of the word near is this idea that he's located here with you. Quit acting unreasonable. The second understanding of the word near is that he is near in authority. Like, he's not just standing here, he holds all power, dominion, and authority. So not only do you understand that he is in the room at U of M with Nora, he stands in power in the room with Nora. He stands in power with your marriage. He stands in power with your job. So it's not just the location, it's actually his very power in the location. The last part of nearness, which is really powerful, is this idea that he's eminent, which is a really great characteristic of God. It just means he can make it happen. Like, it's one thing to be present. It's another thing to have the power. It's another thing to give the power. He is imminent. Like, He's already working on your problem before you even had your problem. He's imminent. So in turn, be present. Move from separated to near. It's pretty normal for us to want to move away from the person that we're having the conflict with. That's kind of natural. In fact, I find it kind of funny. Over the years as a pastor, I've done marriage counseling, and sometimes marriages decide they're going to just move out from each other. And I kind of jokingly say to them when I'm counseling with them, well, I bet you're not fighting as much. You're not in the same room. You're not, the understanding of God being near is that His very presence wants to be present with what you're going through. He doesn't just want to kind of see it from afar and hope you're the best for you. Good luck, guys. That's not God. He will not unfriend. He will not unfollow. Sometimes we move, though, to sitting alone. We'd much rather kind of just leave me alone. I'm just going to go take care of this. You understand, don't you, that He is near? Verse 6a says, do not be anxious about anything. It's funny, there's 3 negatives in a row there. Do not, and then the word anxious is a negative word, and then about anything doesn't leave a whole lot of room for, there are 3 negative words in a row. The word anxious is this really great Greek word called merimnaho, but it just means this, to be, there's 2 parts to it. One is the self, to be anxious or troubled with your own cares. That's one way you get anxious. You're anxious about something that's going on in your own life. And the other is to be anxious for other people, to care for or look out for someone else's interests. That's called being a mom. That's called being a really good friend, where you're anxious for something going on with someone else. The instruction is negative, negative, negative. Do not be anxious about anything. But you want to know what's more anxious? When someone says, calm down, John, that makes me anxious. That makes me very troubled. Or when someone says, take a breath, John, that just doesn't go over well with me. I don't like that. So actually the idea to be calm, he could say, be calm about everything. But he doesn't say that. He says, don't be anxious about anything. Be calm, take a breath. Let me remind you just briefly who gives us our breath. So taking a breath is actually a really good idea, because what you're really doing is taking the original breath that God gave to you, reminding yourself. Take a moment to remind yourself that God is near, that God has your anxiousness in mind. Do you need to be anxious about that? It's interesting, the word in the Greek almost reads, take care full, or take care fully, which is interesting because there's 2 sides to that. One is the fact that I need to take care of it. I need to grab this. I need to grab onto the fact that God is standing here next to me and He has this problem. So I need to take that. But if I'm not careful, something will take me. Anxiousness takes me places that I don't want to be. Anxiety stops me from understanding the goodness of God. Anxiety stops me from understanding what it is that God has for me. Well, you say, but Pastor Johnny, you don't know my situation. It's hard for me to be calm. In fact, my foot is shaking. See, girls, go ahead and show the foot is shaking because it's still going on. You have to kind of remind your foot. But in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Wait, what? I'm just supposed to pray? Yeah. So with your anxiety, you're going to refocus. You're going to say, I'm going to say a prayer. It's interesting they use prayer, petition, and thanksgiving. They all seem like the same thing, right? But prayer is a place. In other words, take yourself to a place where you can trust God. It's hard to trust God when you're in the place that's just filled with conflict. Take yourself to a place. There used to be things like prayer closets, or there were prayer meetings, or there were prayer places that you could go. Maybe create that spot. You know that Jesus prayed so often in the same spot in the garden that when he told them after his resurrection, I'm going to meet you in the usual place, is how it reads in the Bible. They knew exactly where that was. He would pray there all the time. There was a usual place. But prayer is associated with a place, but it's also associated with the second area of prayer, is this idea of petition. That's when it gets personal. He already knows what you're thinking. He already knows what you're grieved about, but he loves to hear about it. He loves to be personal with you. Prayer is a place of personal attention from God. And then the last one is thankfulness, where you just remind yourself out loud to God, well, how good he's been to you. You know, he's been really good to y'all. Really good. It's usually associated with understanding his goodness and his blessing. I'm saying this over every situation. Your conflicts, your situation, all these can be thrown under the bus if you're not careful. Susie, pray for them. Do what you can to pray with them. Sometimes when you don't have, very good, well done. So I'm a father of 3 boys. They're all now beyond college age. When they were small, they would run into my arms as soon as I got home. And then after a while, they grew older and they would come when I called. And then after a while, they didn't come anymore when I called, and I had to go look for them. And then before long, they started to make decisions on their own and didn't call. But when they call now, when they can't figure out how to jump a battery, it makes me smile. I can't wait to be the father to them, to teach them something that they hadn't learned, or when they need something changed, or when they can't remember those things, I get to be the father who tells them what to do. Do you know that prayer is the same approach? When you first fell in love with Jesus, you used to talk to him a lot. You used to run to him. And then before long, you kind of got comfortable with just kind of when he called, I would come to the altar. When he called at the end of camp, I would make a decision for him. And then before long, you might have even stopped being in touch with him at all. And you might even be in a place where you find yourself very estranged from God. Here's the good news. If my sons were to call right now in the middle of church, I would probably pick up. Or at least I'd text them to let them know I can't talk right now. I'm preaching. He will not cast you out when you call on him. No wonder we find ourselves sad and angry and unreasonable, or seeing only ourselves, or anxious. We've been saying no to Daddy. It's time to say yes. It's time to pray. When you do pray, you move from clenched fists to open hands. And then verse 7 says, the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is a result. This is not like a reward. It's a result. When you go to God in prayer, you walk away with peace for that anxiety. You walk away with hope for the problem. You walk away with an understanding of the goodness of God that you weren't reflecting on before. That's what prayer will do. The peace of God, this word peace is the Greek word eirene. It really means it's exemption from the rage and havoc of war. I loved that as a definition. Is that not what we feel? The rage and the havoc of what's going on around us? You know that prayer brings about peace, which comes through the rage and havoc of war. But the Bible goes even further to say that he doesn't just want to offer us an absence of conflict, peace. He wants to offer us shalom. Shalom is a restoration of relationship. He wants to come in as your father. He wants to mediate with you. He wants to be next to you. And when he does, it guards your heart, which is the things you're feeling, and your mind, the things you're thinking about, both. That's what the peace of God is. Now, many of you in this room have understood what the peace of God is, and it's possible that somebody who's here has never experienced the peace of God in their life. They've never understood what it's like to be forgiven from their sin. They've never realized what it's like to be supported by the Creator God. Today could be the day you understand that. Today could be the day that you reach out to Jesus and he saves you. Anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Jesus came to make peace by his blood, the Bible says, which just means that's how far he desired peace for us. He did it by dying for us. Euodia and Syntyche, be at peace like Jesus was. Like Jesus brought you peace. Susie, help him, remind him. All right? And all y'all, I'm reminding you to be at peace. We need to be done. So I'm just going to close with a few of these last verses. Verse 8 does this. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. So Jesus, do you remember in Matthew chapter 12, said, when an impure spirit leaves you, they go looking for dry and arid places. Like, in other words, when you get refreshed by God, the demon doesn't want to live there anymore. He doesn't. He looks for a dry and arid place because that's where demons hang out. They hang out with the people whose bones are dead. When that happens, though, Jesus said, when it arrives, then the demon says, I will return to the house I left. When it can't find a place to go, it says, I'm going to go back to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits along with the wicked one that are more wicked than itself. And they go in and they live there. I want you to hear this. This is really interesting. When you become refreshed by God, if you don't replace the furniture, if you leave it empty, all you really did was leave empty, more room for demons to come back. And they'll bring their friends. There is this understanding that part of what God has called us to is to learn, to be thinking about what it is that God desires for us. Sometimes some of you have understood freedom from an addiction, and you have swept the house clean from that addiction. But if you're not careful, you could leave room for for where that addiction used to live, the room the addiction used to live in, now is unoccupied, and so some other addiction could move in there. That's what Jesus said. So I just want to encourage you to be thinking about what it is that you'll put in the room. Paul suggests is whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right. You'll remember that he suggested that love is patient, is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, it doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. Love never fails. Be thinking about how you're turning back to God. So, in the same way that these girls had turned away, it was a very visual thing in the church. Everyone had seen this, and now they're realizing, oh, he's not really talking about Euodia and Syntyche. He's talking about me. I've been turning away from God in these ways. I better turn back toward him. So verse 9 kind of sums it up. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Wow. Can you imagine being that good of a coach? That you said, you don't have to be a better player than me. You just got to be as good as me. He was saying, I want you to put it into practice. In other words, the last point, number 8, is just this. Be practicing. Because what happens normally is we start quitting. I want you to hear clearly, quit quitting. Try trying. Quit quitting. Practice. Put into practice what it is that you need to do to follow after Jesus. Be practicing. Change I'll quit into I'll practice. Paul concludes with just a couple of verses to summarize. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned, I've renewed my mind, I've been teaching my mind to be content in whatever the circumstance. So we're renewing our mind so that we can learn how to be content. If we have it, it's because God wants us to have it. If we don't have it, it's because God doesn't want us to have it. We're renewing our minds, whatever the circumstances. And then verse 12 says, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Philippians 4:12. What's Philippians 4:13? Yes. I can do all things, all this, through him who gives me strength. What's interesting is that in the Greek, it doesn't start with I can. It starts with all things can I do through the one who gives me strength. We sometimes read this like it's, I can accomplish all my dreams through Christ who gives me strength. That's not at all. This isn't about the dreams, it's about your nightmares. It's about the one who will walk with you through your nightmares and give you strength for your nightmares, not for what you can accomplish. You may remember a young athlete named Wardell who, in his freshman year at Davidson College, started to write Philippians 4:13 on his tennis shoes. It was a tough time for Wardell. He wasn't sure he was going to make the team from year to year. He wasn't all that good at free throws. He started to shoot more free throws, started his freshman year to go an additional 100 free throws after every practice. He continued to write, I can do all things through Christ who give me strength, on his tennis shoes. He still does to this day. And now Wardell is the MVP of the National Basketball Association with the highest free throw rating. That's Steph Curry, Wardell Steph Curry. That's not to say you can accomplish it, but rather that God steps in to give you strength to accomplish the things that need to be accomplished. He will say, he writes that on his shoes, not to be a better basketball player, but to be a better follower of Jesus. The statement is not about our dreams, but about our nightmares. And it's about God's will. So here's the main challenge that I'm given. Their praise band's going to come back while it's still the 4th of August. The tendency is to say, when you come look through this list, I can't do that. And you know what the answer is? It's true. You can't. But he can, and he can give you strength so that you can. I'm going to let the fighting women go down and invite the praise team. So the question is, will you stand firm in the Lord, choose the Jesus way when facing every situation in life by renewing your minds to be content?